to give us insight into green bonds within the Africa real estate context. We've got our next speaker now, who will also come up on stage. There will be a brief opportunity for question and answers. However, if time doesn't allow, then those interactions can take place on the sidelines. Ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome to the front of the stage for the next 30-minute presentation, Marcine D. Mitchell. She is the Senior Manager for Strategy and Business Development for Climate Business Department for the IFC. A warm welcome to her. It can be warmer than that.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for API for inviting me here, and congratulations on your 10th year anniversary for this wonderful summit, and I'm really happy to join you. So this part of the program is about the future. So this morning we heard a lot about investment and some of the challenges of bringing investment and scaling investment in Africa in the current days. I'm lucky because I get to talk about the future and what's coming and some of the innovations that's coming to Africa and things that we can think about in the terms of green bonds. So, but before I jump into green bonds and why I think this is an exciting opportunity for Africa, let me tell you a little bit about the IFC. So we're the International Finance Corporation, and we are part of the, whoops, going the wrong way, sorry, the World Bank Group. And we are the largest international finance corporation that solely focuses on the private sector in emerging economies. We invested approximately $22 billion last year in FY18, including our own accounts and mobilization into emerging economies around the world. And since 2005, we have invested a lot in the climate space. So as you know, the climate is changing, and it is impacting how we're going to be doing business in the future. So as the World Bank, we recognize that if we don't address the issues of climate, we're going to see many, many hundreds of millions of people falling back into poverty. All the gains that we've made in terms of development, we may lose. So we need, as we're developing, to be able to recognize and do it in a clean, smart, and sustainable way. So because of that, IFC has prioritized climate as one of the things that we need to do. And in that, we have 5 basic areas: clean energy, which people mostly think about as in climate is renewable energy, smart cities, green finance, and climate smart agri. And then at the heart of it also is the idea of our built environment. So, you know, the built environment takes about 19% of our emissions come from our buildings and our use in the buildings. And if you add our construction materials, that's almost 29%. So it's a major, major impact. So as we transform our economies, as we look forward, we need to transform our built environment, and that's where all of you come in. And it's not a negative thing. This is an opportunity for us to do things differently and for us to make money while we're doing things differently. And so that's what we're investing in. So at IFC, we've invested about $22 billion, plus maybe another $16 billion we've mobilized since 2005 in climate across all of these different sectors. In real estate alone, we've done about $5.5 billion of buildings that we have invested in green buildings. And we do a bunch of all the different sectors, so offices, retail, mixed-use hotels, et cetera, in buildings, which we need to make them green. And you can see about 151 in different investment projects. Africa and North Africa and part of the Middle East is a small proponent, but we see it's one of the fastest growing. Because as you know, Africa is also one of the fastest urbanizing regions in the world, and with that urbanization is coming building growth. And so we are there with you investing in those type of businesses. So what's our strategy? How do we do this? We really are looking at it as transforming the markets. Bit by bit, we are going to be moving into doing more and more green. As I noted, we start with our own balance sheet. That's the $5.5 billion of investments. We do that on our own account. But we also work with governments to do incentive works for buildings and building codes, to incentivize certification. We have an EDGE certification program, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the future, and we have a booth outside, so I encourage you all to come and visit us and learn about that green building certification program. And what I want to talk to you about today is really that we're doing it through investment with financial institutions and capital markets to really leverage what we do and to scale the amount of investment going into the built environment, going into real estate in a green and sustainable way. So that's the more important thing. So I just wanted to give you that background about IFC. Why am I standing here? This is our experience. We are in the markets. We are working with you. We're investing directly, and we're investing through financial institutions. So we think that one of the areas of how do we raise more money for the real estate area is through bonds, okay? Bonds is something where we can work in a capital market, which institutional investors, we heard a lot about pension funds this morning, what kind of things they wanted. They wanted liquidity, they wanted, stability, they wanted instruments that they understood, and so a bond is one of those things. So what is a bond? We know a bond is a debt instrument, it's a way of borrowing money, but it's tradable. It's a security, you can trade it back and forth. So it has that liquidity, it has a market component to it, and most importantly, it is very, very well known by institutional investors. It's a way that institutional investors can put money into projects. So then what is a green bond? What's the difference between a bond and a green bond? And so a green bond really is what we call a use of proceeds bonds. So it still is the full backing of whatever institution is borrowing the money. So if I'm a corporation, I'm still giving my full balance sheet to borrow it. But I'm telling the institutional investors, I'm telling the investors that I'm only going to invest that money in green projects. So that's what makes it a green bond. It's the use of proceeds makes it a green bond. And what's important in that is what type of projects that you use for a green bond. And there's a row of different types of projects that can be used. We think of things like renewable energy, and in terms of what makes a difference to you, we think about greening our buildings, energy and resource-efficient buildings. That qualifies as terms of a green building. There is a principles called the Green Bond Principles, and those are very important because they give a framework for what makes a green bond. So it's one, the use of proceeds, like we talked about. Two, it's defining what is green, right? So is it renewable energy? Is it EVs and transportation? Is it real estate that is efficient? How do we define that? It is agreeing up front in terms of how you would manage those proceeds. That means making sure that those use of proceeds are ring-fenced away from your other things so that we know that they're green. And then the final part of the principles is reporting on it. So those are the things you have to think about as you're thinking about greening your assets, as you're thinking about working with green assets, are these principles of how do I use those proceeds? How do I make sure that they're green? So why do this? What is the, why should I go through that extra problems and troubles of ring fencing and understanding what's green and doing all of this for a green bond? I mean, why don't I just do a regular bond? Well, there are some benefits. There are benefits both for the investors and there are also benefits for the issuers, okay? So for investors, one, they understand this instrument. So when you want to have more institutional investors in the real estate market, part of the problem is they can't do things project by project. Usually. We talked about this morning having platforms, having large sums of monies. Bonds gives them that kind of platform, and institutional investors understand this product. Two, we kind of talked about the transformation of our economies into low-carbon economies. And we're seeing institutional investors a huge amount of interest in investing in green projects. And trying to understand, how do I invest in green projects? Well, a green bond gives those institutional investors that opportunity to diversify their portfolio, to invest in green projects. They're also concerned about risks. A lot of real estate, we're generally in the world, we're sitting by coasts, we're in hot climates, we are in places where we have some risks of climate. And by investing in clean, efficient, renewable assets, they're reducing their risk. They're reducing the risks of the type of thing. So that's what's in it for investors. So what about for issuers? Why would issuers want to do it? Well, we'll see, and we'll have examples of what's happening in Africa, but it really attracts new investors that they may not be introduced to before. There's a lot of excitement and reputation that you get if you can show yourself as a clean and forward-looking company. It goes beyond just what you're doing green. It really reflects being forward-looking, being well-organized, being well-efficient managers. And it improves your reputation and investor diversification. So we're going to see the level of interest and what happens when companies, banks, and other institutions issue green bonds and are doing things in that manner. So this just shows the growth of the green bond industry. As you can see, it's a small industry. It's just really started. I think our first bonds, and I would say the World Bank was probably one of the first makers of green bonds, really early in the process. So in those early years, these were all DFIs, which are development finance institutions, or MDBs, multilateral development institutions. And then over time, more and more investors have come in, and you can see it's growing, growing, growing. We think by the end of 2019, there'll be about $250 billion worth of green bonds into the market. And we see that trend going up. We should be in the trillions of dollars probably in the next 5 to 10 years. So this is a huge market that's growing, lots of interest in it, and an opportunity to see what's around the corner and be part of that process. So not surprisingly, in emerging markets, really the first emerging market bonds came out in 2012, so we're talking a very young industry. It's only 6 years of data. Not surprising, China was the big bear in the room, and this is usually most of these are sovereign bonds from China. Africa and North Africa, Middle East are kind of at the very beginning of this process. About 1 or 2% of all the green bonds are now coming from there. But as I said, Africa is fastest growing, fastest urbanizing, fastest area in terms of being able to leapfrog and take advantage of this new trend and new financial instrument. So one of the things that's going to help with this is that in 2016, 19 countries, African countries, the regulators and stock exchange got together and said, we really need to put some energy behind this financing of our capital markets. And they came up with something called the Marrakesh Pledge that was happening in the UN climate conference called the COP, it was COP22, and this was an initiative to foster green capital markets. So they're doing knowledge sharing, they're putting in regulations, they're doing other type of things to spur this market within these African countries. And you can see where the countries are. They're both regulatory signatures and stock exchange signatories. So 4 of the leading countries who have really jump-started this are Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, and South Africa. These guys were the first countries to take on a framework for green bonds and to really look at applying these green bond principles and all these other type of green financing structures in order to develop their markets. So they were then, of course, because they put these frameworks together, these are also the first countries in Africa to issue green bonds. So starting with South Africa, it started with the city of Johannesburg. So what type of entities are issuing bonds? So what we have basically is about 3 or 4 types of entities. We have cities or municipalities that are issuing it. We have banks who are issuing green bonds, and we'll talk a little bit more about banks and why that's really important to you as a real estate industry. We have some utilities and kind of state-owned companies, as well as just the very beginning to have corporate issuances of green bonds. And one place in Nigeria, we'll see that, we have a sovereign bond from Nigeria, so that was a very exciting thing. In South Africa, it started with the city of Johannesburg, who issued a bond for about $139 million. This was really to the areas that people are investing in tend to be renewable energy. That's kind of the most obvious area. So you say clean energy, that's an easy one for me to invest in. It's clear about what the definition is. If I'm investing in solar, I know that's renewable. I don't have to worry about it. The second area that people are investing in is real estate. So that's why it's really important to think about this. This is another area where your buildings, if you have energy efficiency buildings, you can really grow with that. But the important thing to take away from this is the level of demand. So when Johannesburg issued this bond, it was 1.5 times oversubscribed. And this was investing in low carbon infrastructure. When Cape Town issued it a few years later, it was 4.3 times oversubscribed, and that happened within 2 hours of issuing. So again, that's the demand that we're seeing. This is these institutional investors who are looking for opportunities to invest in instruments that they understand, in the environment, in ESG. And so when these bonds, which are just beginning to bubble up from the emerging markets, come out, everybody's jumping on it. 4.3 times oversubscribed in 2 hours. There we have a corporate group, the Growth Point Properties Group. And basically, they were investing in real estate. And again, the thing that was so interesting about what they were able to do with the bond is normally in these markets, you're getting 3-year, 5-year money. They were able to get up to 10-year money by issuing the green bond. Okay, because again, the demand is there. The institutional investors are looking for these longer-term investments, these larger investments, and so oversubscribed longer-term investments. And then finally, just this year, Nedbank was the first commercial bank in South Africa to issue a green bond. They were 5 times oversubscribed. So you see the trend, right? 1.3, 4.3, 5 times oversubscribed. And this was also in renewable energy and in real estate. In Africa, Nigeria, one of the big things that was different in Nigeria is they were the first country in Africa and only the 4th country in the world to do a sovereign green bond. So this is with the full sovereign backing of the country of Nigeria. That was very, very exciting. They were investing in green power. You see utilities there as well, and really, again, banks. Banks are, again, the big player, are becoming the big player in this area. Morocco, very exciting as well. Again, banks, and where do we see? A construction firm. So again, a construction company, 5 issuances of $420 million. We also have Namibia, which unfortunately beat you, South Africa, by a year in issuing a green bond, but for a smaller amount. And they won the award for the Green Bond Pioneer Award as the first commercial bank in Southern Africa to issue a green bond. So again, Namibia is doing it, and this is a trend coming up. And finally, upcoming will be Kenya. So they've just gotten, in August, the Capital Markets Authority approved the ability to issue a green bond, and we're going to see them coming up with a green bond for student accommodation, again, which is a built environment type of property. So the takeaway here is that real estate is a very great, good asset class for green bonds, along with renewable energy and energy efficiency. And it can be a way of funding the growth that we need in the real estate market, bringing in institutional investors who in the past have not had a way of coming into the real estate market for the issues that we discussed earlier today, this morning. So this is very exciting. The difference with renewable energy and real estate, though, is that renewable energy is somewhat easy to define in terms of being green. While real estate, we talked about the green building principles, real estate is a little trickier. We have to have a clear definition of real estate. We need to measure the impact. We need to be able to report on that. And so how do you do all that without it costing you a lot or without it being very heavy in order to do that? How do you figure out doing that? Well, one way, and the way that I would say is the most important way, is certification. Certification is key. There are green building certifications here in South Africa. There's Green Star. There's international certifications such as LEED. And in the IFC, the World Bank, we have a green certification called EDGE, which is also available in South Africa. It's available in 150 countries around the world. And we have staff on the ground helping in terms of a certification. And what does a certification do for you? What it does is it takes out all of that question mark of how do you define a green building? What does it mean to be green? Because it has a standard of what it takes to be green if you're certified. It also is part of, you need to have a second opinion about, are you really green? For example, the EDGE certification is automatically a second opinion under the Climate Bonds Initiative, which is one of the biggest rating agencies, second opinion agencies on green bonds, so that makes it very, very simple. And then also reporting. You have to report at the end of the day, what is my impact, how much did I save in energy, or how much did I save in GHG emissions? And again, these certification programs, I can speak for EDGE, automatically gives you that information. So it makes it very, very simple for you as the asset owner or the asset or the bank investing in these assets to understand very quickly what it is that is green. IFC is so enthusiastic about this area. We, together with Amundi, which is one of the largest asset managers out of France, put together the largest green bond fund for the emerging markets. It's going to be up to $2 billion for green bonds, only for emerging markets. And the reason we've done that is that we've been, very, very convinced and very bullish that this market is going to take off. It mostly is focused on the banking industry because that's where things are coming. But if we can get the banks to basically issue these green bonds, they need the assets. And so they need the assets. How do they get the assets? They lend to the real estate market as one of their main assets. So it's a way of raising all ships. And so IFC is a big part of that, and Amundi, and we're seeing, again, being part of this growth in green bonds. So this, again, is just an example of our green bond standard and what boxes it ticks in terms of being used for green bonds. It gives you the criteria, the definition of green bond. In EDGE, it's a green bond certification, which says that you need to be 20% more efficient as a minimum in energy, water, and in your use of building materials. So it's a very clear, very streamlined standard. And again, it serves as a second opinion that you need as part of green bond issuances, or if you want to go to the bank and say, I've got green assets, this is something that you can do. It also has the reporting and lets you do the allocation without any extra work. Let me give you, this is an example. Now, this is not in Africa, this is in Colombia. But it's a really good example of how green bonds, particularly to the banking institutions, have really had a catalytic impact, effect on creating green home market. So the first bond we did, we lent $117 million to the Bank of Colombia. We, as IFC, was the anchor tenant, or the anchor investor. In fact, we were the sole investor in this case. And we issued this, it was the first issuance in Colombia. We did a huge marketing push for them, 17 events, 300 developers, big splash saying, Bank Colombia is open for business in terms of green bonds, and particularly using real estate was going to be their major effort in terms of their asset class. It was so successful that the next year, without even using IFC, they were able to go into the market on their own with a $175 million bond, which was 100% subscribed. I don't know how much oversubscribed it was, but it was 100% subscribed. It was only for green mortgages, and they used our certification system in order to certify that the green mortgages were there. And then a second bond they were able to do for another 100 million, and we were not involved at all. It was oversubscribed 2.8 times. They brought in 72 domestic investors, and they were able to achieve better pricing than the original bond. So it really sees how that, from the very first bond to being able to leverage onto more and more assets. And for developers, and this is what's exciting here, is that they were able to offer green construction finance from 0.5 to up to 2% less than conventional market rates. Okay? So this spilled over and was able to be passed through to the developers who were building green to incentivize them to provide product for this green bond. So it was a win-win-win all along. And then for home buyers too, they were also, for the mortgage side of it, so there was the construction finance piece and then there were the mortgages. And for the mortgages, they were discounted at a rate of 65 basis points for the first 7 years of the loan. So it really, again, it impacted the homeowners who were able to get lower rates, it impacted the developers who were building more buildings, and it impacted the market. So you can see, when we started this, there were hardly any buildings, green buildings in Colombia, and now these are just a few of the examples of all the green buildings that came out of those bond issuances. So it really was a market creator. And this is what I think can happen in Africa. We're starting from a small base, right now only 4 countries, but I see this being able to be expanded into other countries. This is what's coming around the corner. So it's important for you, as you're looking forward, if you're thinking, how do I grow my business, what do I need to do, is to be able to start putting these green technologies into your business, being able to build green so that you're going to be a top candidate for banks as they're trying to issue these green bonds, for investors who are looking for green investments. You'll be in the right place. So I think that's all I have to say. This is our famous "you have a choice," a crossroads in the road, and we hope that you will move towards the green side. So thank you.